Welcome to Daredevil in the Details, a show that explores and dotes on the philosophy and themes of Netflix's Daredevil, a digression collection brought to you by A Method to the Madness and ZeroIndent. I'm Walter DC McNeil, and I'm joined, as always, by Patrick from A Method to the Madness for our Season 3 premiere, Pat. It's here. We're back to the good source. Hey, I'll add some claps in the mix, don't worry. There'll be fanfare.
I know, it makes me realize how much I take stuff for granted when I go from good to bad. Oh no, bad to good. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, do you think? I guess season 3 wise, we haven't really talked about it at all because we wanted to avoid spoiling the Defenders stuff. Even though the show was bad, but some of those plot points are obviously quite salient for this. What's your overall feeling of like how we're like? How do you think season 3 is going to go for our coverage? Like, what do you anticipate us coming away with, or what are you looking forward to? If there's anything you want to foreground.
Well, I don't know if it's much different, but because we do talk a lot about the religious themes, symbolism, stuff like that. This season goes pretty hard in that. I've also been learning a lot more about that kind of world and subjects recently. So I'm keen to have a lot more to say about it.
Cool.
And also, as we know, the showrunners and the writers change pretty drastically in this season, and I'm keen to talk about the feel of it and what's this invisible sort of ink that's writing this season.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about it during the Defenders. We didn't end up doting on it too much because I think we were just trying to move through that material in a way that was digestible for us. To me, I think I'm going to have a lot to say this season about homogenization and the ways in which the kind of integrated world capitalism like has a tendency to homogenize subjectivity when it comes to creativity and art, and the ways that like it's doing that this season. There's things in that season that are clearly decisions being made that are being gestured at because of the Marvel apparatus, while also some of the writers and storytellers involved still trying to preserve whatever it was that made the first 2 seasons work, and whatever that underlying kind of the underlying thing that makes the Daredevil TV show unique and interesting and compelling. They sort of try and maintain both. They want to be able to bring in some elements that would be representative of where predictably the kind of homogenization of the Marvel content ends up going, but then also trying to still have that room for that, the kind of special voices and things like that. Something that you could compare it to in a contemporary context might be the success and singularity of the third Guardians film in the larger context of Marvel kind of collapsing under its own weight as the increased focus on serialization and the absence of creatives being allowed to do what they do because of the expenditure required to produce all the stuff, etc. and so forth, right? You still have a project that comes out under that banner that is still part of like a singular piece of art, but is still kind of corrupted and influenced by the fact that it was part of this larger framework, right? I don't think that third film looks the way it does if Endgame doesn't shake out the way it does, right? And so I think in some ways, when we approach this season of Daredevil, I'm interested for us to, like you said, keep an eye on the underlying, I guess, thing that is the show, right? The underlying magic, creativity, things it's interested in, and then maybe where that butts up against some of the, some of these episodes are going to be written by like 4 people. And I think we're going to notice that when it starts to happen, as I suppose a more material way of laying that out. Yeah, okay. Interested to see how we go. This episode, we are talking about Daredevil, episode 27 and 28, which is season 3, episodes 1 and 2. Episode 1, Resurrection. Episode 2 is Please. Episode 1, Resurrection, was written by Eric Olesen and directed by Mark Jobst, 2 new names that we haven't seen before. So, Pat, could we please hear the summary?
Barely alive after the events of Midland Circle, Matt recovers at St. Agnes. His hearing is compromised, so too his ability to see the world. He argues with Sister Maggie about faith and declares that he would rather die as Daredevil than live as Matt Murdock. Elsewhere, Karen visits Matt's apartment, where we learn she carries a torch for him and is still paying his bills, now with Foggy's assistance for one final month. Matt trains but is beaten in a boxing match, and beaten again when he tries to stop an assault, a pantomime of his former self. Meanwhile, Agent Ray Nadeem celebrates his son Sammy's birthday, his life overshadowed by crippling debt incurred by paying off his sister's cancer treatment. At work, Ray's boss explains the pincer trap of capitalism. Ray cannot receive a raise because of his debt, and he cannot pay off his debt without a raise. Frustrated, Ray heads to meet with Fisk, a menial task that leads nowhere. Fisk, however, has motivation to make a deal, keep Vanessa safe at all costs, and so Ray is poised to mediate a deal with another kind of devil.
You know, for all the sand we just kicked up about some of the issues that this season might be having, I've gotta be honest. I think Ray's character for me I'm unsure where I'm gonna land on him, because I remember when I first watched this being pretty uninterested in him, but then I hadn't read all of the textbooks and the philosophies I have now. That was a pre socialist David, so I'm interested to see where I end up landing as this being a critique of the American policing and economic mechanisms at the time. So I'm interested to see where I come out on this.
Yeah, this show suddenly like gets really interested in like class themes. This season especially, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
I mean, given I think especially like you've got that is interesting, right? I think especially with Foggy, who's now making big money at a big law firm, and then you've got that kind of underlying through line with his family and their butcher shop and things like that. And then you've got Ray's kind of arc, and then you've got Karen trying to pay off Matt's apartment. Yeah, money is an interesting kind of fixture in this season. So I think we'll keep our eye on that. The one thing I wanted to talk about very, very quickly at the start is we open on the building kind of landing on top of Matt and him being washed away. In what feels like for Daredevil an expensive VFX shot that this show doesn't normally do, which made me wonder if it might have been left over from the Defenders, like they just never used, or they just use assets, because it doesn't feel like this show at all.
That's a good point, yeah, because I mean that did. I was thinking the same thing too, but that also that shot is like really good, and the shot directly after it. It's the big sweeping camera pan, Matt doing Jesus pose, rock hits his head, and then it cuts to a drain pipe, but you don't see him fall out of it or anything. It's just a static shot of a drain pipe. Like it gives off this really artsy kind of sense, I feel, and so to me that suggests a lot of like inspiration and sort of planning and stuff like that. So I was wondering, like, oh, did they really want to make a point of opening this season symbolically and sort of epically, and yeah.
I mean, I think that's it's epic in like it's epic in the kind of traditional dramatic sense, in that it feels foreboding. Like This isn't the kind of epic, oh, this season's about to kick off. This is like things are bad is the vibe that you come away with, which is like you said. I mean, I think that takes a lot of planning and execution. I just have to, the VFX themselves. It's a very cool shot, but I just went, okay.
Yeah.
And there's
nothing else like that in the rest of the season, eh?
No,
or like the rest of these episodes, yeah.
No, and then Matt sort of he's found by a stranger, and he's like, hey, take me to St. Augustine's, or he just says St. Augustine's and then passes out. And then we cut to the church where it sounds like everything is underwater, and we get some interesting camera work there as well, cribbing off some of the stuff that we saw in season 2. And we can clearly identify Father Lantom's voice, although it's a little bit hard to sort of hear. And overlaid on top of this, you have Matt asking, where did you go, Elektra? And then Elektra's voice at the end when they die saying, this is what living feels like. And then that's when we get the revelation that he can't see.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Soft, giving us a reminder of what happened, right? I think this is a pretty obvious, like a little quick, cliff notes. Hey,
Previously on.
Yeah, previously on, quite artfully done, and also really leading into the fact that like Matt is deeply traumatized by everything that's happened, right? This is also this is that dual purpose storytelling that we love to see, right? It's communicating to the audience previously on, but then it's also going, hey, this stuff is like this is the worst place Matt has ever been so far, right?
It's especially devastating because his life was getting to a tranquility. It seems he was
a balance,
achieving sort of a balanced nirvana state of being superhero lawyer man.
But now he's back to where he was as a kid. He can't see him. He's literally in the same building where he grew up.
Yeah, and it starts off so strong with like the rebirth symbolism, and like having him like relive the trauma in like a symbolically parallel way. Like that's shot of him going, I can't see. It's the kind of different details. It's really cool.
It's pretty spectacular, and on top of the fact that, like, I mean, for me, the thing that sings out to me is so impressive here is that this is the rebirth, right? The resurrection, right? Matt, but it's not, right? It's a kind of perverse inversion of that because Matt performs his noble sacrifice, and he doesn't come back stronger with firmer convictions, and he doesn't come back with galvanizing his apostles and starting his church. He comes back doomed to like live in the consequence of that noble sacrifice. In some ways, I think it would have been better for Matt if he died under that building. That might have been a greater relief for him. But he is cursed to go on, and I think that to me is why. I will talk about it because it's a central thing in this episode. But that to me is why he is so dejected about that's why he's so dejected about his faith and about the concept of having a life again. Is like this wasn't, in some ways you could imagine internally Matt thinking this wasn't the deal. Like I was supposed to die and sacrifice myself to save the city. That would have given my life complete meaning. And now I'm here, and it's like God didn't give me what I wanted. He so I have to live on. Well, that doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem fair to me.
Yeah, as he goes on to compare himself to Job, like this, he sees himself as a victim of divine providence, or like a victim of what do you call that? Like the God's path or whatever. There's a specific term for it, but
yeah, I suppose we'll talk about it. I want to get through because I think for me that scene, I mean that is actually almost immediately after this. I do want to talk about the Karen sequence, and then we might bite into the Job stuff because I assume that you haven't read the Bible in a minute, so I want to read you the Job passage so that you kind of. Well, here's what I want to do. I want to read you the Job passage and then see what you make of the way that Matt pitches Job's story in contrast to what's actually in the book itself. Yeah, so the next thing that happens, I guess, is we cut to Karen, and we get a little bit of flashback of the night where he revealed that he was Daredevil. And I mean, there's some really, really just extremely strong dialogue here. Where one of the lines that I thought was brilliant was, "How can I be this mad at someone who saved my life?" Which is just an iconic Karen line to me. Like what an absolute embodiment of that character. And then so too when Karen says, "I'm not sure Daredevil is the problem."
Yeah,
what
I like how you can completely switch out the context of this conversation to actually be about alcoholism, and it would make like such perfect sense. And obviously that is something they point out in this scene. She says, "Oh, it certainly sounds like an addiction."
Yeah. She's like, "You two almost have me believing it."
Yeah.
And here's a character question that I have for you, Pat. why does Karen refuse to let go of Matt? Like, is this guilt? Is there some love still there? What do you make of sort of her? Because Foggy comes in and he's like, you said that you were, packing everything up. Like, clearly you're not. What do you make of Karen's refusal to let go?
I honestly don't know.
I don't know either.
It's because she's already like so heavily influenced by family trauma and losing I don't know what you call it, like your state of livelihood. It's not like losing your job or anything like that, but like losing, she lost her. Try not to spoil it. There's hints that Karen has come from somewhere where she lost everything.
Yeah,
and she just doesn't want to repeat that. Is I think what we're meant to think at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you were about to say is actually interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I suppose we'll have a lot to talk about this season. Because that's simultaneously some of the most interesting stuff this season, and also some of the most. This is a TV show stuff, where it's like, oh, that's not content I would have. That's content I would have excised as unnecessary because it explains this show has two disassemblable characters, which is something we've talked about before, right? It's Matt and Karen. They're the only two characters that could be fully disassembled. And by the end of this season, we know all of the things which made those two people into disassemblable characters, which makes them non-disassemble. Like, which is like a self-deflationary. The example I always give is one of the things that keeps happening in The Walking Dead. I'm at season 10 at the moment in my rewatch for my video, and something is happening in that show where they'll introduce a really, really, really compelling character that behaves in particular types of ways, and you go, oh, this is a rich tapestry of a character. We'll never fully know the depth of them. And then across 2 seasons, through the use of flashback, we will learn everything that has ever happened to them that is relevant to the show at hand. And it robs some of the subtext that's happening when you see, because people in real life don't work that way, right? You never fully see the extent of somebody's history. And so if you're trying to create the impression of people in the form of characters as part of a narrative vehicle, if you just have a character that is completely explained, they suddenly become not a person anymore, or the simulacra fades away, and you've just kind of it's the Borhe thing, right? The best and most accurate map of the territory is the territory itself. You've no longer got a map; you've just built the territory again, which is an unsustainable method of doing anything. Anyway, all to say, Matt brings up the man from the land of Uz, which is the Job story. Were you familiar with this, or just from this moment?
No, the first time I ever heard of this story was from Daredevil.
All right, I'm going to read you the Job passage then. So this is Job 1 to 22. Sorry, Job 1 to 22. It's long. Bible is wordy. They did not have a good stylistic editor, let me tell you. And this is also, I didn't write down which translation this was, but it's whatever the current, there's 4 that the Vatican endorsed in English. This is one of them. Job was a man who lived in Uz. He was honest inside out, a man of his word who was totally devoted to God and hated evil with a passion. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He was also very wealthy. 7,000 head of sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, 500 donkeys, and a huge staff of servants, the most influential man in all the East. His sons used to take turns hosting parties in their homes, always inviting their 3 sisters to join them in their merrymaking. When the parties were over, Job would get up early in the morning and sacrifice a burnt offering for each of his children, thinking maybe one of them sinned by defying God inwardly. Job made a habit of this sacrificial atonement, just in case they'd sinned. One day, when the angels came to report to God, Satan, who was the designated accuser, came along with them. God singled out Satan and said, "What have you been up to?" And Satan answered God, "Going here or there, checking things out on earth." God said to Satan, "Have you noticed my friend Job? There's no one quite like him, honest and true to his word, totally devoted to God and hating evil." Satan retorted, "So do you think Job does all of that out of the sheer goodness of his heart? Why, no one ever had it so good. You pamper him like a pet, make sure nothing bad ever happens to him or his family or his possessions, bless everything he does. He can't lose. But what do you think would happen if you reached down and took away everything that is his? He'd curse you right to your face. That's what." And God replied, "We'll see. Go ahead, do what you will with all that is. Just don't hurt him." Then Satan left the presence of God. Sometime later, while Job's children were having one of their parties at the home of the oldest son, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing in the fields next to us when Sabians attacked. They stole the animals and killed the field hands. I'm the only one to get out alive and tell you what happened." While he was still talking, another messenger arrived and said, "Bolts of lightning struck the sheep and the shepherds and fried them, burned them to a crisp. I'm the only one to get out alive and tell you what happened." While he was still talking, another messenger arrived and said, "Chaldeans coming from 3 directions raided the camels and massacred the camel drivers. I'm the only one to get out alive and tell you what happened." While he was still talking, another messenger arrived and said, "Your children were having a party at the home of the oldest brother when a tornado swept in off the desert and struck the house. It collapsed on the young people and they died. I'm the only one to get out alive and tell you what happened." Job got to his feet, ripped his robe, shaved his head, then fell to the ground and worshipped. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I'll return to the womb of the earth. God gives, God takes. God's name be ever blessed. Not once through all this did Job sin. Not once did he blame God." And Matt's conclusion is that Job was a pussy for suffering willingly without complaint.
Oh yeah? That's the beauty of the Bible. It can be interpreted in many different ways.
Yes, and also it's the fundamental problem with it. Matt has he has some great little lines in here. He basically says, like, "You know what I've decided? I think Job was a pussy." And then he goes, he says, "I'm not Job, and I know my truth now. In front of this God, I'd rather die as the devil than live as Matt Murdock. I am what I do in the dark now. I bleed only for myself."
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this dialogue is this is A tier, S tier writing right here. "I am what I do in the dark now. I bleed only for myself." Are you kidding me? Episode 1, like 15 minutes in, it's just bangers. They're just laying them down pat, all timers.
The edgelord knob has been turned all the way up.
You know, if this was the 90s, he'd be wearing a leather trench coat right now.
It's so edgy. It's so Batman.
I think the delivery is what sustains this, right? In the same way that Robert Pattinson's big emo thing in the Batman works because of the way that he carries it. I think, like, yeah, it's great. And I also think the fact that Sister Maggie she sort of refuses to meet his energy. And she does call this out, like, vocally a few times, but she refuses to bring herself to his energy because that would validate this sort of self-suffering, self-pitying, however you want to frame what's going on with Matt. If she were to bring herself to his energy and meet him on his energy, that would sort of be tacitly acknowledging that it's valid. And that show's done that a bunch of times with different characters at different times. Foggy and Matt do it to each other in different conversations. Different characters do it to each other. I think it's a really, really subtle way of the show, and maybe it's just the actors, right? They're keyed into this stuff. But it's a really subtle way of creating simple contrast in conversations that alludes to, like, underlying intentionality that isn't explicit in the text, and it lets you kind of paint in the scene work yourself.
Right, yeah, because it's such a blasphemous kind of theme, and the fact that Maggie, who is a nun, sort of remains quite calm about this proclamation. She's I guess it's sort of showing, like, a virtue of patience and, like, tolerance and stuff like that she has, which to what you're saying speaks to, like, a really deep element of her character, and something that Matt desperately needs in his recovery and in his journey throughout this season. Yeah,
which is interesting given that he's pushing Lansam away at the same time.
Hmm.
There's something
Yeah, I know.
there's something there at like a schematic level that I think will play itself out, right?
Yeah. In terms of Job, though, I think it's interesting how you can, there's a lot of different complications that spring to mind when as you're reading out that story. Like, I guess the main one would be the potential paranoia that Job has in slaughtering, making sacrifices just in case one of his children sin, and that does make up the actual like crux of that story is that, um, maybe he was false in his belief that it was driven by fear. But no, at the end, it turns out he still wouldn't curse God after he'd taken everything away, concluding that he was in his bones faithful and in the right in the scope of God's eyes.
So the way that I see it, right, is Matt. The question, yeah, you're right. The question for Job is like, is he making these sacrifices and praying to God as an act of self-preservation, or is it one of faith, right? And Matt he thought he was Job in some vague capacity, right? He thought he would continue to lose everything and he would suffer in silence and he would not curse God's name. And what he found is that the only thing that he got out of it is the only thing at the end of the day that happened is he lost everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, why is that beneficial? Why is that better? Why is that aspirational? Like, if a god works that way, then what's the point of him? What good is he to me? If that was going to happen anyway and I don't get anything out of it, why am I sacrificing all these things for him when I could be sacrificing them for myself?
I mean, it's interesting how the element of and this gets explored in the subsequent episodes about the element of Matt seeing himself as God's warrior is driven out of fear, essentially. Same as Job, he fears the unknown. He has this sort of like fear of the Lovecraftian element of fate and the unknown, as he has that conversation with Father Lantom. And yeah, so I don't know, it just makes a lot of sense that he identifies with Job a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah
it's really, again, really great stuff. We get one of the all-time favorite things that this show loves to do, which is a Fisk making an omelette scene, which is it's just always so good. Like, it's the music and it's the framing and it's like the way that it so easily communicates this is like a ritual that's important to him. Stuff like this is just, they're absolutely brilliant character notes, right? The fact that no matter where Fisk is, he will somehow find a way to perform this ritual. Just sensational.
And it's also a ritual that like demands its setting needs to be one of high class, and just the juxtaposition of this montage being in a prison is it implies like a motivation without saying anything, without saying actual words. It's really like sort of efficient.
Lessons in how to tell me what a character's thinking is what this scene is, right? Yeah, I mean, to make that explicit, basically the implication here, right? Last time we saw this was in his penthouse, where he made them for Vanessa. Previous to that, he was making them for himself. Yeah, and him making a prison, and as he finishes the omelet, you cut to the actual audio, and it's the prison, the noise of the prison, and he tells everyone to shut up. And it's like all of the elements are here, but it's not complete. The ritual is incomplete because it's not in a place of class, and Vanessa isn't here.
Mhm.
And that tells you the two things that he's going to go after with a passion, right? Is how does he get that security to have that aspect of class, to have that aspect of domination, like we talked about in season 2, and then how does he get Vanessa back so that it's a complete ritual?
Yeah, and Vincent D'Onofrio does it all wordlessly. Like I love how he doesn't even like sigh or anything. I feel like another actor would have like done a big while looking at the wall or something. He communicates all that just by looking at the wall, just by like slowly setting down his knife and fork and looking at the wall. Yeah, it's so good.
Man, just the best cast. I'm still like, I know that this out of 30, we talk about this for 30 hours or whatever now. I'm still stunned that a simple scene like that, some entire shows don't have any scenes that are that simply well done and well acted. And Daredevil seems to have one every episode, if not multiple per episode.
Bit off topic. Did you watch Echo?
Not yet, because I wanted to save it if we were going to cover it on the show. I wasn't sure.
Oh yeah. Alrighty.
Why do you have opinions?
Well, I finished it this morning, and yeah, well, there's Fisk is in it. I don't think that's a spoiler.
Do you think is it worth us covering?
No.
Okay. Well,
but Vincent D'Onofrio is fantastic in it, so that's why I wanted to bring that
I think
up.
he was just born to play this character.
Yeah, I think he was.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about, speaking of echoes, we get the next scene is Matt trying to relearn echolocation under the chapel, where he's sort of trying to click, and then he trips over and stacks it real hard. It's pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just like having the worst time, man. And something that I love, and this might be a British thing that you're not aware of. Mate, it's from the UK, like Irish specifically, but Sister Maggie brings Matt a hot toddy, which is incredibly good. You've definitely not had a hot toddy before, have you?
What is that? A hot chocolate? Or what is that?
No, man. It's
I don't know what that is.
It depends where you get it, but it's basically honey, lemon, sometimes there's spices, and sometimes there's even cough syrup in it, and whiskey.
Oh, okay.
That's why there's a little bottle of Jameson.
Right.
And they're real good, and we'll have to make them. This season will probably end during winter. Maybe our episode, our season finale, we can have some hot toddies. Keep the pipes warm. It tastes exactly what you'd imagine, which is it's basically just like a hot tea, but there's whiskey.
Okay, I'll be honest, it doesn't sound too appealing, but I'll drink it.
It's not great. It does clear you out though. Like it like
I bet it does.
They shit'll sort you out. And then in the grossest scene I've seen in a while, and I've been watching The Walking Dead, so that should tell you something. Just like as far as human anatomy that's foul, Matt uses the like little neti pot in his nose, and he's just like spitting up chunks of like coagulated blood. It's just foul. It's nasty. But
this is such an interesting beat, because as a solution to like how he's lost his hearing, and it's like there was blood clotted in his sinuses or whatever, and I've seen this season a lot, and like I've always found this solution to be like very appropriate, and it's like right in the middle of the episode, and after he's sort of like given up all hope, and from the perspective of what Maggie says, everything's still swollen, you just got to give it a bit, maybe it'll heal itself. It makes sense. I don't know. It's the tactile. It's visible. There's an storytelling of objects and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It also doesn't very
work.
Good
is the other thing. This doesn't fix it.
Well, yeah, no, it makes them a bit better, but yeah.
And that's kind of that's part of the I think in a different show this would fix it what I like is that Daredevil is like, no, like this might just be like there's a moment here in this episode where you go, is this just how he is now? Like, is this just is he gonna have to relearn how to do what he's doing? And he does to an extent. I think that's what's really compelling to me, is that it's not just that his sacrifice, that he's doomed to live through it. And so the consequences of that are going to be the whole setup for this season for his character. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, personally, all of that is tied into the consequences of that single event and the events preceding that. And what I like too, so I mean, what I mean by it doesn't fix it is he tries and it's still not there. But what he seems to realize is he's forgotten how good his sense of touch is, it seems. And so he sort of starts to, he's walking barefoot and he starts to feel the vibrations of what we figure out later as trains, many stories below the church. And then he starts to work out again and he starts to try and build himself back up, a la The Dark Knight Rises. And a really nice detail I want to put a pin in because it's going to be really formative for this season is as he's boxing, he goes to do a kick and his back just doesn't let him.
Yeah. I like that.
It's part of the way that we talk about in season 2, this season, moving its choreography into something different. He can't really do flips and kicks properly anymore, so it's going to be mostly boxing and bruising, right? He's moving back and he's moving more toward the battling Jack than the Devil of Hell's Kitchen.
That's a good point about how he forgets how good his sense of his senses are more than just like smell and hearing, right? And it's he's lost faith in God, but which carries over to he's just lost faith in like everything about himself, like his capabilities and stuff like that. And I remembered what I was going to conclude my point from before with Job was the point of the story of Job is that Job was, it turns out he wasn't false, he was a true believer. He kept faith even after all that. And then the point is that Matt didn't. The same circumstances happened to Matt, but he didn't keep faith. And so I think we're meant to retroactively go back and question like his faith in the first few seasons. And the fact that he does sort of like drop everything, he's in such a intense state of like depression and self-pity. I think it kind of speaks to maybe there was a foundation there that wasn't as strong as he thought it was. I think that's a symptom of that, is that he forgets how good his touch is and stuff like that.
Do you think it's a symptom of the strength or a symptom of the nature of his faith? Because to me, I think it could be both, but I guess to me, the fact that he's always having these really these philosophical conversations with Lantum that are almost academic about the nature of faith and good and bad. I also wonder if some of it is that for Matt, some of that faith isn't necessarily elemental and fundamental in the same way that it might be for like a fundamentalist who will reject any evidence whatsoever and just blindly has this faith. Matt is constantly questioning it in this kind of almost like an abstract sense. And so I also wonder if part of it is that the nature of his faith was always slightly removed from how most people have faith.
Right. Like Father Lantum.
Yeah.
He seems to be more of a theologian than like a priest or like a devout person.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's also partly why it's easier for someone like him to move out of that mode of having conviction in it, because I think you, and this is the strength part. In some ways, he's always had one foot in another world, like out the door, kind of. And that may just be like the nature of his upbringing and the tragedies that have befallen him, right? I think to some extent, if he's comparing himself to Job, I I think what Matt's starting to realize is that in real life, Job doesn't do this Job doesn't maintain the faith. Job walks away. And that seems to be kind of the conclusion of that to me.
Right. Yeah. As if the the story of Job in the Bible, as if the Bible itself is insufficient, and
Yes.
it just didn't prepare him adequately and didn't tell him everything that it needed to, and that's probably an element of his resentment.
Yeah, there's something misleading about the nature of the way that this book is designed, and it is insufficient, and that's partly why he's always talking to Lantham about this stuff.
Right. Yeah. I like that connection. That's good actually.
Yeah. And I mean, that truly is that's how you grow out of a need for faith, right? Is especially, I mean, particularly in a Catholic sense, something like that. The piece that you don't see here in this story is the modern mechanism for how this stuff kind of keeps people in the faith, which is the community aspect, where it's sort of designed. A lot of the mechanisms that radicalization for cults and stuff uses is basically the foundation of the Catholic Church, which is they sort of, you build your entire life around this thing. And all of your friends are in the church, and all of your socializing is through the church. And so the concept of leaving the church is almost unthinkable, because it's your entire world for the most part. And so what's interesting about Matt is, this is what I mean about he's got one foot out the door. He, to my mind, we never see any evidence that he's ever been part of the community of church. For him, it's always been the faith, to the extent that even as a kid in some of the flashbacks we see, you can kind of tell he's already having these debates with the nuns when he's 14. He's already not. This was a guy who was never going to fully believe. He was always going to be there for the rhetoric and the discussions and the philosophy, but he's not a devout follower.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like his flavor of I don't know if this is maybe offensive, but his flavor of mysticism is more akin. It's more spirituality than it is specifically Catholicism. Yeah,
that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, there is an absence. There is a distance between what he is doing and the typical mechanisms under which people practice religion. And that, and that's also part of what makes him and Lantham get along and have this thing in common, because you can feel Lantham's the same way. And there are noteworthy moments in Lantham's life that he references that confirm different aspects of what he believes, but then also different things that have happened to him that maybe communicate to him that this isn't this thing is useful, but it's maybe not all there is.
Yeah, that's why we love their relationship.
It's so good.
It's so special.
We get have you got anything to talk about before we talk about the little boxing, the little card that they put together, the Matt v Random Stranger boxing docket?
Wait, what the hell are you talking about? Oh, yeah. No, I don't have anything else.
Okay, because this is a really, really great scene. I was a little worried about the action this season. I'm going to remain a little worried until I see a few more episodes, but this is really, really good stuff. The guy's like, do you want me to fucking fight a blind guy? She's like, yeah, just listen. Just shut up and we paid you, right? Just do this thing. And it starts off pretty sketchy, and then you get this glimpse of the old Matt where he just, once he gets kind of a firm footing on it, it's the second round, he just unleashes on this guy.
Yeah.
And you get the classic Matt, one of the Daredevil moves, which is, it's a bop, and then it's bop, 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 and he just goes in, and it's you've seen him do that a dozen times, and it's crazy, and then he gets hit in the ear once, and it's basically done.
I like how that other guy's oh man, he hits hard, and it's well, yeah, because you're meant to be holding back. If you don't hold back when you're sparring, it would hit hard. And of course, Matt doesn't hold back.
Yeah. but that's also like he's kind of still got something. There's something here that he's still got, but there's something he's lost as well, right? And so, kind of dejected by this, you know, he and Sister Maggie have another kind of little conversation where she's like, "I'm not indulging your self-pity," and then puts on the necklace, and he's like, "Sister, you don't," and she's like, "Just for me. It's not about you. It's about me." Which is a little like a little hint, a little bit like a little sprinkle of like, hang on, what is this relationship these two have? What is it? Why does she feel some kind of ownership over it? Why is she still coming down here? She's got shit to do. What is it about?
Yeah.
What's happening here? And I, you know, I know where it goes, but I think it's a really simple way of setting up a question in a story. Why is she so invested?
And I like there's, speaking of Sister Maggie, there's a sort of another reason why she might be invested in Matt, or like at least compelled to see him recover, is when, you know, after that first round when he does get a few hits in, and she's like, you know, oh, it's something else to see it with my own eyes. It's a miracle, you know, for all intents and purposes, to someone like Sister Maggie. Some sort of divine, there is something divine about watching a blind man successfully dodge and weave someone's attacks. And yeah, I think it's another small element of
that's fascinating. I had not picked up on that at all.
And you know, she's the one, you know, obviously she cares about Matt. She says it's the only thing that's gotten him out of bed, but she's also very, very keen to get it going. Yeah.
Huh. That's really, I'm going to keep that in mind, because that's a really compelling point, especially given where we know that relationship is going. I think that's a pretty compelling question at this stage. It's like, how much of this might be self-serving to an extent, or self-serving is the wrong word, but like self-serving in the sense that it's vectorized through her faith as part of the motivation for doing this, rather than trying to help him specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you know, it's all just an unlikely kind of scenario to begin with, that, you know, this pairing happens.
Yes,
you know?
this scenario. Yeah. Boy, it's gonna be real hard not to spoil that.
Yes.
So just us walking on eggshells anytime we talk about her. And then sort of Matt decides that he's not. Listen, that was an L, but I'm not. You know, I'm not done taking L's. Or he's like, I think the way they were supposed to read this moment, which is basically Matt gets back out there. He gets on a new outfit, which is all black. It's the iconic season 1 outfit with the notable addition of the white sash, the, you know, little white sort of line under the mask, as you can see in Crystal's incredible artwork, and goes out. And I think where to take this, and I'm interested to see if you had the same reading, I think where to take this as Matt's going out to beat Daredevil again, and I think he's decided if he can't, then he may as well just die. Like, it's either he's either going to do it or he's going to get killed, is my kind of take here. Is that your reading too?
It's kind of hard to judge this with the context of the next episode, but yeah, it seems that him seeking a fight despite being still severely underprepared is it's at the very least a super self-destructive move that is very intentional by Matt. Yeah.
Well, because he loses and then he tosses the pipe to the guy. Basically,
that is this episode.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Never mind. For some reason I thought that was next episode. But yeah, okay. In which case, yes, I think he did want to think this was his plan the whole time. Yeah.
Because that's the way that his story in this episode ends, is with that moment, basically. We get one interstitial scene with Sister Maggie afterwards where he's licking his wounds, but this is like the moment for Matt. And I mean, it just happens that the police arrive and he once again is doomed to live. Can't catch a break. Can't live right, can't die right. You know.
It's so epic. On like a sort of, I don't know, personal level, how he says, "God forgive me," like when he thinks he's about to die, he still has to say that.
It's great.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting.
Damn, good story continues to be great. We get our first new proper plot character introduced, which is Rahul Nadeem, a special agent at the. So okay, Rahul's setup is interesting. I need to call him Ray because the story calls him Ray. I know someone called Rahul, so it's stuck in my craw. Special agent of the FBI. And the setup for his life basically is over the last like 5 years, he's paid for all of his sister's cancer treatment, and in doing so has incurred a significant amount of debt that's basically like crushing his family. You know, one of the first character notes we get is his wife. When she went to the shops, all 5 of their credit cards wouldn't work, even though he was pretty sure he paid 2 of them off. And when he goes into work, and obviously his kid is sad is the other thing. Like, he just seems like he can't keep it together, this guy. He's running track, but the car is right on the heels as quickly as he's laying track. He just can't get ahead of it. And when he goes into work, he basically says to his boss, "Okay, I need to do my performance review." And she's like, "Look, I'm trying to protect you here. It's not bureau policy to promote someone with that much exposure." The implication, of course, being that it makes him exploitable in some capacity. Ironic, one might say. Bit of dramatic irony here, if you know where this is going.
Yeah.
And yeah, just talking about the ways in which the integrated world capitalism ruins people's lives. So the healthcare system in America is so bad that he has to go out of his way to spend all of the money that they have in over-leveraged debt to pay for his sister to live, such that he can't afford to live because he has so much debt, but he can't afford to get a raise to pay off that debt because the rule is that if you have too much debt, you can't get a raise because that makes you more senior, which does make you question whether or not hierarchy and salaries should be related to each other when it comes to responsibility or not, and really makes you wonder about whether or not this system is fundamentally flawed. I've been rereading the 3 Ecologies by Felix, and there's a bit where he talks about the ways in which and it's his phrase, which is integrated world capitalism, which he kind of delineates from previous forms of capitalism, which were kind of localized per economic country, and they're now kind of like fully integrated because of the 3 ecologies of machines, which he goes into. And one of the things he talks about with IWC is the motivation of the system is to benefit the least number of people in the system the most amount, because it provides those people the means of control of subjectivity, which is to say it gives those people the means to define what is good and bad in the capitalist reality. And you see that like in practice here. Like, this is the praxis of that theory, which is the people in charge have said, if you have too much debt, you can't get a raise because that makes you exposed. And the truth of the situation is he's exposed either way, but the system doesn't want to bring him up further into the system because the system is concerned that someone like that might go, hey, maybe this is unfair. Maybe we should change it. And so there's a way in which it homogenizes the subjective worldview to make sure it maintains the kind of status of the elite and their control over subjectivity. And it was one of those, like, I think I was reading it on Thursday. And I watched this episode on like Wednesday or something. And so it was like, I was like, oh, Jesus, talk about like prescient. But it's grim.
What's especially grim is that it's in this particular case, that argument is built on a pretty solid piece of reality, in that, like, as we said, like, you know, this there's some hardcore dramatic irony going on here, in that it does indeed make him vulnerable, and he rushes into decisions that ultimately are a result of him being in debt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other obvious sort of, I mean, the other underlying thing here, right, is that, and the argument is like, well, yeah, it makes sense, right? Like the argument being levied is this will expose you even more. But that's only an argument informed by the system that put him in this position. And it's that thing of like, this thing that always drives me crazy about people that are like, capitalist pilled is like, it doesn't have to be that way. The only reason this is a problem is because it is that way, and we could just change it. We could change it. And there's always this argument of inevitability. You see it all the time at the moment with like AI, where people go, oh yeah, it's inevitable. You just have to let it go and embrace it. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, that's not how reality works. That is them controlling subjectivity and finding ways to motivate the leverage of subjectivity to benefit the people who are going to become rich off of it. Like, and that's why things like unions are so important, and that's why things like labor laws are so important, is they give you frameworks to push back against these decisions and these frameworks of subjectivity. Like this idea that like, oh, well, everyone's going to use AI is inevitable is horseshit. That's not true. That doesn't need to be true. We can make that not true for our generation if we wanted to. And it becomes a question of incentives, and it becomes a question of who is incentivized to repeat that same rhetoric without thinking or even considering it, right? And that's where you get the evolution of social media, and that's where you get your TikToks and your Facebooks and all the Twitter and all these things, which just homogenize all of that stuff into like a blank canvas that completely obliterates any concept of subjectivity for the self, and it's all just informed by these ecologies of machines. And Felix predicted it. He was like, what's going to happen if we don't stop this is we are going to put ourselves in a position where these techno-organic creations run us to benefit capitalists, and no one's gonna even see it because they're gonna control subjectivity. They're gonna control reality. And if you think about the ways in which reality is now mediated through the super reality of social media for most people, for a lot of people, like, talk about calling your shot. I mean, like, if he'd bet on that, he'd be a fucking multi-squillionaire by now. You know what I mean? Like, it's interesting. And given the season is about this stuff, you're going to hear a lot more of me talking about Marx as well. So get ready for that.
But when you dress up that dilemma in a setting like the bureaucracy of the FBI, that is it seems like some insurmountable, odds. And so from the perspective of Ray Nadeem, it is like such a, I don't know, a monumental crisis. Like it is just like a really unbeatable, like just a situation that you can't do anything about to keep working within the system that you have.
Yeah, it's an existential threat to him, right?
Yeah, and it's like such a simple motivator that is like makes complete sense and is like drives the story in such an interesting direction. Yeah,
he's in a real Kobayashi Maru. There's no win option here. I mean, then we obviously he goes to speak to Fisk, and he's just had this conversation, so he's kind of pissed off. He's just really dismissive. He's like, whatever, you're not gonna, I'm like, I don't even know why I bother. Like, why am I even here? And Fisk, in the most Fisk way possible, doesn't just say, I want to make a deal. He goes, Mr. Nadeem, is there anything that you would do, anything at all, everything in your power to protect in the entire universe, in your life? And he goes, and then Fisk is like, we need to, I need to protect Vanessa. I want to make a deal. But yeah, it's Fisk, so it's dressed up in quite a speech.
I like how every time Fisk goes on like that, it's almost like he doesn't leave room for any like retort or any like comeback or anything like that. Like it's such a like poetic little statement that's can be as vague as you want, but also like is specific enough to get his point across. It's just such a he's such a manipulator, you know, like
he's a genius at it too.
Yeah.
It's I mean next episode is one of the all-time manipulation Fisk moments too. There's some pretty exquisite stuff happening from the talking around the problem type thing that Fisk is so good at. I mean, well, that's episode 1. Is there anything else you wanna cover?
Well, I just want to say, as a lot of these episodes do, they always try to parallel the ABC plots, and in this episode, it's like everyone digging themselves out of a metaphorical hole, which I like. Fisk in digging himself out of prison, Ray digging himself out of debt, Matt digging himself out of self-pity. And there's
also from under a building, one could also say.
Yes, that too. Yeah. And there's also kind of an opposite a trajectory for Fisk and Daredevil once again being such perfect foils for each other, where at the end of the episode, you know, Matt essentially tries to give up, while Fisk is doing the opposite. He's trying to rise up. You know, when he says, "I want to make a deal," he decides that now is the time to make moves. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about the ways that this show is like just really clean structural schematic work. Like just going, okay, what would be interesting to be happening in contrast to this thing? And then not going to produce this effect, but going, well, what tension could that bring? And from that tension arises new opportunities within the story itself to have conversations about those tensions.
Yeah, it's always so clean. I love it.
Yeah, it's one thing I do want to say, I guess, in contrast to the Defenders, and the next episode in particular, which I've already said that the first one goes hard, but the second episode there was some outstanding dialogue. Is that there was, and we said this during our coverage of the Defenders, there was maybe 4 or 5 decent epigrams throughout that make you go, huh. And then we end up talking about it for like 15 minutes or whatever. There's maybe like 4 or 5 throughout the whole length of the Defenders. There's about 7 in the next episode alone. Like the dialogue here feels like they're really trying to tap into the magic of those first 2 seasons. And I almost wonder if the dialogue might maintain that, while maybe it's the structural and thematic stuff that begins to kind of erode throughout the season. I don't remember. I just remember something about how this moves towards or moves through its story. I remember something about it not quite working for me. And I'm curious to see what that ends up being.
As am I.
Yeah. All right, well, we will take a quick break, and then we'll be back talking about episode 2, which is Please, which it's a weird name for an episode, but hey, what are you going to do? All right, we'll be right back.
There was a man from the land of Uz.
Book of Job.
Book of Job. Story of God's perfect servant, Job. He prayed every day at dawn with his knees on the ground, his face in the dirt. Slaughtered 10 goats, one for each of his children, and burned them at the altar in God's honor. Of all God's soldiers, Job, he was the most loyal.
I know the story, Matthew.
Oh, then you know what happens next. God murdered all 10 of his children in cold blood. Scorched every inch of Job's land, lashed at his body till his skin was covered in bloody welts. God rained shit and misery on the life of his most perfect servant, and still, Job would not curse him. You know what I realized? Job was a pussy. You see, that was me, sister. I suffered willingly. I gave my sweat and blood and skin without complaint, because I too believed I was God's soldier. Well, not anymore. I am what I do in the dark now. I bleed only for myself.
Welcome back. Okay, so we're talking about season 3, episode 2. Jeez.
There wasn't a one in there at all.
Yeah, that was the one thing that wasn't. Written by Jim Dunn and directed by Lucas Etlin. Again, new names on the docket. And that is going to be a bit of a theme moving forward. Is a lot of this is done by freelancers until we get Steven Surgic back for a few episodes toward the end, which is kind of interesting. Weirdly, Eric Olesen comes back a few times as well, who wrote the first episode. So there is something happening here at Marvel where they're kind of trading writers between all of their TV Netflix projects. So we will have more to say about that probably mid-season when it starts to become a bit more pronounced, I suspect. Cool. Can we hear the summary, please, Pat?
Ray acts on the information from Fisk and takes down the Albanians in an effortless, clean raid. This success precipitates Fisk being attacked in the prison gym. District Attorney Tower agrees to move Fisk out of prison on Ray's insistence. Karen is assigned to report on the attempted kidnapping of Rostam Kazemi. She speaks to Rostam's daughter, Neda, and explains how her brother's death and the misinformation effectively ruined her life. Matt tracks down the laundromat and wins round 2 with the kidnappers. Foggy heads to the family butcher. His mother pressures him to come home. Karen arrives, convinced that Neda's report confirms Matt is still alive, and she and Foggy fall out. Meanwhile, the Fisk convoy is attacked by the Albanians as revenge for diming them out to the FBI, but Dex Poindexter kills the assailants single-handedly in a spectacular fashion. At the police station, Matt overhears reports about Fisk, portending events to come. I didn't know portending was a word.
Yes, to portend. There you go. You learn something new every day.
That's a verb.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Pat, if you write long enough, you learn that you can kind of just use any words as verbs if you try hard enough. I think the all-time favorite of mine was in book 1. I've talked about this on a show at some point before. It was in book 1. When I snuck bifurcating through as a verb, and no one noticed. And it wasn't until someone was like, "Hey, that's not how that works," and I was like, "Well, hey, did it work in the scene?" So I think it did. Is what you'll find. So
I already used split in 2 somewhere else. So
well, I didn't. But
wait,
it
is
wasn't.
that what that means?
Yeah, but the word itself, reading it has such a specific, it's so evocative of like a process, and where split in 2 is describing an outcome, and so I wanted it to be focused on the process of the thing, not what happens.
It sounds like a very deliberate process, bifurcating. Yes, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Anyway,
it's not like something just split into 2.
Yeah, because splitting into 2 isn't the same thing as bifurcation happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a quick lesson in stylistics. The openings. Okay, so there is a absolutely sensational opening 2 shots of this episode. I don't know if you noted this, but it's Matt kind of reeling. He's not quite sobbing, but he's not quite not sobbing. And against a white wall, and then it crossfades to Fisk staring dead ahead. And it's not anything except tone setting and that reminder of what you talked about, which is like these things are going to be placed. These stories are doing different things. They're going in different directions, right? It's really, really simple basics. And then it cuts to the FBI raid. So it's even just using the classic Kuleshov effect. It's just really, really simple stuff, right? You show Matt, who's upset. You show Fisk, who seems confident in that way that only he can look. And then you cut to the FBI raid, communicating that it was probably his information that led to this raid. We get that confirmed later, but you already know that just from the filmmaking. Just really great stuff.
True.
Yeah, the basics done well.
What's the shot of Matt crying? Is that like when he's still on the floor after he's attempted to like run around or whatever? Oh, no, it's after he's come back from.
It's after he's come back from almost dying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We get the FBI raid. They get everyone, and it seems to go completely seamlessly. And then in prison, Fisk is doing weights, and he gets shivved, and then in just like a crazy moment, attacks the dude that attacked him, knocks him on his ass, and he's about to like behead the dude with a weight for for the bench press, and decides not to, because again he's trying to get out of here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The restraint it must have taken him to not crush that dude's head. Props to him.
Also, the insane thing is like he's lifting this weight. The dude stabs him, and Fisk just flings the weight onto him.
It's like you probably could have added some extra weights then, I imagine.
Yeah, it's crazy. This dude's benching double his body weight for sure. Yeah, it's pretty dramatic. He doesn't really seem bothered by the shiv either. He's not. You know, he seems to have had worse.
He's got a lot of padding on him, you know.
You got that insulation,
yeah,
and that composure as well. I would not be that calm if I got stabbed. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the opening setup here, and the idea is that he's in danger now that he's knocked, now that he's dimed out the Albanians. A thing that will become incredibly relevant, as we heard in the summary. They will not forget this, and it also gives the FBI motivation to get him out of the prison. And so those two things are kind of, I guess, hanging over this episode. And then I've got, Matt's hearing. So funny. Matt's hearing seems to be getting actively worse. And he keeps picking fights, trying to die, which is something we already talked about. And he and Sister Maggie kind of talk about this. They have a conversation where he, she's sort of like, this self-pitying thing isn't a good look on you. Like, you need to pull your shit together, basically. And he kind of says, look, this is your calling, right? And they have a little conversation about like the fact that being a sister is her calling. It's what she's always known that she was meant to do. And Matt is sort of arguing the same thing about his calling, where he basically says, if you could be anything else, then it's not your calling. And this line is underwritten and co-signed by the combination of like self-pity and grief and loss. Right? It's not just grief for Elektra, it's grief for Matt Murdock, and it's grief for like maybe losing the last threads of Daredevil that he had. This line isn't just him making an argument about faith, it's him making an argument about like existence and being a person. And like, like when you find that thing as a person, if you lose the ability to do that thing, what's the point in living? Is the kind of the underwritten argument here.
Right, and keep in mind that this this comes after, or not directly after, but it was in the last episode of that flashback after he reveals himself to Karen. Was that last episode, or was is it this episode?
That was last episode.
Okay, that was last episode. Yeah, but essentially, the conversation ends with him saying, "I don't need him to be a part of me anymore." And then Karen says, she presses X to doubt. And then here we get
Karen will remember that.
Here we get him grieving the loss of his abilities, which suggests that
Karen was right.
It was so he deeply intertwined with his identity and his personhood and his pride, that he, without Daredevil, he's nothing, is what he thinks.
Yeah. And perhaps also that perhaps also an element of that is this question of, it's not just that without Daredevil he's nothing. It's that he so desperately wants, at that time when he was talking to Karen, he so desperately wanted to be capable of being any other way. Right? And that's sort of, that's what you see at the start of The Defenders, which is him desperately trying to be a different person, and reject that calling, I guess, if you want to compare it to this conversation they're having. And it's that question of like, can you escape your underlying nature? And should you even want to? And if you do, like, what's the point of living then? And it's a very, it's again, like, even though he's not exercising a religious practice here, it's a very literal, like, classic Matt Murdock, there's a right and there's a wrong. Like, he's still sort of repeating the same mistakes, I think, that led him here, just through a different kind of a different filter at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that makes me think of, just having kind of put my thoughts into words there, is like it is that that sort of what would you call it? The extreme judgment that Matt has always exercised over reality, in part because of the faith stuff, but also just like because that's who he is. Which is kind of the other thing that created a lot of friction with him and Karen. Particularly if you think about the end of season 2, and the questions of right and wrong that end up with their kind of second date going poorly. It is because he gets into this position where like he can't not argue about this stuff. He's like incapable of letting stuff go, and I think it's no coincidence that the next scene is a flashback to young Matt and Father Lantom giving him a lecture about like being argumentative, and like I mean the line he says is argumentation is a skill, being argumentative is a sign that you're angry.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt hasn't resolved this, right? He just did the same, like he's having a conversation with Sister Maggie and he's doing the same thing he did as a kid. He got into a fight to punish himself, and then someone else is coming to him and trying to be vulnerable and being like, hey, do you want to talk about it? And he's just being argumentative and only dealing in extremes and only dealing in kind of suppositions instead of just actually talking about what's going on.
Right. And perhaps there's an element there of, as Father Lantom says, he's very good at deflecting. Maybe his identity as Daredevil was one of the most effective ways to deflect him talking about or attempting to be a regular person. And now that he has nothing better to do, he can't be going out doing flips. He has to stay home and talk to someone, Maggie or Lantom, and he has no recourse for not introspecting.
Yeah. And maybe that's part of it. Like, it's not just that he's angry, but he's also scared, right? Is in this moment, like he's going through this like existential crisis, to the point where like he was, only hours earlier ready to die.
Yeah.
And in this moment he regresses to who he was as a kid, right? He's been broken down to the fundamentals to the extent that he's back where he started. He can't see, he can't fight very well. He's angry all the time. He doesn't have anything. He's lost everything. He's back exactly where he started, and he's going to have to rebuild himself from this position.
I like that. Well, first of all, I like how they get the same kid actor back who played him in season 1, and he's sort of the appropriate age still, because that flashback is a bit later than that. But also the dialogue they give young Matt is like pretty much the same dialogue as they give adult Matt. Like, and it was just really cool seeing the actor for young Matt delivering that dialogue, because it really gels in my mind. Those two are the same person now.
Yeah, I mean the fact that he basically is like that he takes a drive-by at one of the nuns for not having like a consistent theological rhetorical argument about a passage.
Yeah.
And Father Lantom's like, dude, she's not a theologian. Like, you need to stop doing this. It's unfair.
Yeah.
Like, just because you understand it better doesn't mean you have to rub it in her face. Like, he speaks in the same way, but he hasn't learned that lesson I'm sure a lot of people that used to be smart kids will appreciate where I'm coming from here. If you're a smart kid, chances were that you had a lot of intelligence and not a lot of wisdom, and so you do stuff like this all the time. And I used to think of it as like sort of it's the jock version of being a nerd, where you just like you use being smart to be mean to people to prove that you're smart. And it doesn't impress anyone. It just makes you look small and angry and insecure, which is where that comes from, right? Because the greatest fear of being smart when you're young is that that you're not, and that you're kind of self-deluded because everyone around you seems to be running a different track and seems to be operating on a different wavelength. And if suddenly you're not special, then you have to be a vulnerable, normal person that makes relationships instead of just like having this shield of intelligence that you can kind of call upon. And I think it's, you know, like you said, giving these lines to young Matt, it's a really efficient way to run the parallel moments, right? So I suppose what I'm trying to point out here is the conversation that young Matt and Father Lantom have about the fight he got into then and the sister that he was lecturing about theology with could happen now, and it could be Lantom lecturing Matt about the fight he just got into and arguing with Sister Maggie. The difference being that Matt is yes, he's broken down to his most component parts here. Yes, he's lost everything, but he is different. He has changed. He has lost something of himself. He's learned something about the nature of how he operates in the world, such that he's no longer concerned with the facade. And so you could imagine the conversation from Lantom being very, very similar, but the arguments that young Matt and old Matt would make are very, very different. You know, young Matt's like, well, the sister should just keep up, and like, it's not my fault that, you know, I keep beating everyone up. They should get better. Whereas this Matt is like, your arguments are bullshit. Like, I'm not interested in your platitudes. Like, I just want to die. Like, I'm not even trying anymore. I'm not even trying. And it's a cool gesture of like, here's who he was, and who he could have been, and this is who he is now. And like, it's bad. It's dark. It's a dark place to be in.
Yeah, it's a good point. You get such a clear contrast of what exactly has changed in Matt's psyche and actually drawing a comparison between like him, a kid him, and adult him is like exactly the parts you need to construct a profile about Matt Murdock, and as you say, like completely disassemble him into like every component part you could possibly have. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, like, you know, if you think about the parts of him that are Stick, the parts of him that are Electra, the parts of him that are Foggy, and the parts of him that are Karen that exist in Matt now, and the extent to which each of those has been killed or destroyed, whether or not they're still present, they have changed him in material ways. And that's where you can start to look at, okay, who could he have been if this had gone differently, you know? And that's part of the I talked about it in season 2, so I won't relitigate it, but that's part of what like makes really, really good tragedies work, is every time you watch them, you're like, maybe they'll make a better choice this time. Maybe this time it doesn't go wrong. And it's, you know, they're always doomed to make the mistake, right? It's surprising, but it's inevitable. And that's just how I guess from a thematic perspective, that's how you set up a compelling tragedy. And this is classic, right? This is like, what if Christ came back and he no longer believed in God? And you know, that's just not a story that the Bible, and that's also like, if you think about it from like a meta perspective or a paratextual perspective, Matt loses his faith, right? So he makes a sacrifice and comes back and doesn't believe in God, and that's not the kind of story that the Bible would tell, which is kind of why Matt is moving away from Catholicism. There's like sort of a there's a character structural thing happening there that you could parlay into some paratext about maybe what the show is saying about religion, or maybe what the show is saying about the externality of faith and like where it's insufficient. And I'm sure there's there's a really interesting article to be written there. If someone's interested in writing that, I think that'd be a really compelling thing to think about and do some research on.
Would the simplified question of that article be like, is season 3 of Daredevil heretical or not? Like from the
that'd be the most simple version of it. Or perhaps what does season 3 of Daredevil think about faith? Or what does it think the limits of faith are? and does it, and where are its convictions on that, and where does it underwrite some of that, and where does it not justify some of that?
That would be an interesting article.
Yeah, there you go. That's a free one for anyone out there. I don't have the time to write it, so if you want it, it's yours.
When I heard all those prayers, all those suffering people, I thought it was God's voice. But I was wrong. All I ever heard was people in pain. And all he ever gave any of us was silence.
So now you believe your calling to do what you do was a mistake?
I was deluding myself.
Maybe that's a good thing to realize, Matthew. Maybe it's time for you to stop.
Oh, no, Father. My delusion was thinking God had anything to do with it. Now, I'm not as capable as I was, but I don't get to choose who I am. I'm Daredevil. Not even God can stop that now.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the big plot thing that happens is Ray's honest, dude. Ray's life sucks. He makes this deal with Fisk, and then immediately his bosses are like, "Yeah, we're gonna give the detail to someone else."
Yeah.
Like his biggest career break, they're like, "We're giving it to someone else, dude." It's crazy. This guy cannot catch a break.
Well, it also seems like there's something fishy going on, right? Just the reluctance and like the just how much his boss seems to be deflecting everything to do with promoting Ray. Interesting, notable,
and there's
words.
It's got that energy of every time he walks into a room, it seems like 10 seconds earlier everyone was talking about him.
Yeah,
that's kind of how it feels. It kind of has that feeling to it. Or you know, they were talking about him or talking about something he should know about. It doesn't. He's an outsider in this institution, and there's perhaps a reason for that. Is all I'll say there without gesturing in any particular direction. But he makes an argument, and he gets the Fisk detail, much to his boss is like, "You cannot fuck this up, man. This is like mission critical stuff here." And then, I don't really have much interesting to say there other than like exactly what you just said. This is maybe setting up some questions for later. We then get Karen Karen, you know, at her job, you know, as a journalist, and seemingly using her reporting on Midland Circle / her reporting in general to kind of hunt for Matt or hunt for proof of Matt's existence.
Yeah. And it was like some really kind of inane subject that she was chasing this time, right? And like something very, very tangential to what could possibly be interpreted as an investigation for Matt.
It was like the air quality in certain buildings
Yeah,
near
that's
Midland
right.
Circle, and Ellis is like, what is it? He says, "It's one thing to work on a story; it's another to let a story work you." Peak, just like epigram, boom, right there, done.
So I suspect Karen's in denial, maybe, possibly, is what we're meant to get from this scene.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I suppose the dramatic irony, given where the story that Ellis gives her goes.
Right. Yeah, true.
Because he gives her the Nita case, and that's the lead that she was missing the whole time, which is maybe Ellis's point, right? Which is like, you can't control reality. You have to chase the stories as they come. You work the story, they don't work you. And that's how you that's how you get your results.
He's like he really has replaced the role of Ben in the series, kind of at this point. Yeah, is like his moral composition and his wisdom, or like, and his position as a mentor figure to Karen. He's one of the good ones in this story at this point.
And it also feels to me that Ben's death galvanized him into this. Like, he was a character who could have gone a different way, right?
Well, exactly. That's what's so great about it. You can trace, his arc back to Ben.
Yeah. But he's also a different flavor of mentor, right? He's a little bit less inclined. He's the right kind of mentor for Karen because he's less inclined to give her more rope than she should have.
Yeah.
Which is something that Ben did constantly.
I like how he handles himself as a boss. Like, it's, I don't know, it was just very I don't know, very, very sufficient,
Yeah, 100%. What I've written down here, which I think is we've already said, but yeah, from my perspective, after this scene, I was like, this is what the Defenders was missing. Is all of these side characters talking to each other and having interesting thoughts about being alive and each other and what they're doing and everything. There just aren't enough conversations like this in the Defenders, where it's about something mundane, but it feels incredibly important because it's important to these characters.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put your finger on.
It's whatever the something is. It's just the thing that is impossible to. It's just it's the je ne sais quoi. There's something that this has that the Defenders doesn't.
I think. I mean, speaking of faith, I think it's like just faith in the show that it's going to be meaningful, and it usually is. And that's why, like, you're more attentive when there's seemingly, inane conversations like this. That there's the sprinkle of like imagination or something like that in certain lines of dialogue that you're like, oh, that's interesting or curious. And it just sticks with you.
It's passion. Like, it sounds really wishy-washy, but it's like passion for the thing. It's the way that I sometimes talk about it in storytelling when people say, how can you, like, what makes something different? Like, what gives it, when I read the first page of a manuscript that someone submits, like what is it that, aside from like, can they stylistically carry a novel? Like, is there, what's their grammar looking like? What's the structure looking like? What's all that stuff? What are the characters? All that stuff. There's also this other underlying thing of like, do they have it? Do they have whatever that thing is? Is there something on that first page or on that first chapter that makes you go, oh, okay. Like, it makes you sit upright and go, okay, there's some kind of underlying urgency for this to be more than it is, to aspire to something else, and that comes from like creative people being passionate in the craft itself, right? It's someone choosing to end a sentence a type of way, not because it's profound, but because it feels right, and then you read it and it does something, right? Like, this show is full of moments that it's not one person sitting down and going, okay, we're going to have Ellis say this because that's the truth about reporting. It's someone going, instead of Ellis saying, you need to drop this, it's not going anywhere. It's like, no, someone looked at that line of dialogue in the second pass and went, how can I punch this up to make it feel important to these two characters? How can I make it feel important in this scene to these two people that are talking to each other about this thing they care about? And that's the thing.
Speaking of, I was about to say, actually, this gives the sense of a very healthy writer's room. As we were saying in The Defenders, all of it was first draft, placeholder, garbage. Whereas this, it really feels like there was a group of people that sat down and had these conversations that we're having right now about motivation and place and feeling. Yeah.
And if anyone's wondering why the modern Marvel stuff doesn't feel the same, the TV shows, the movies and stuff, it's because they tried to get rid of all the writers' rooms. It's a big part of what SAG-AFTRA and the strikes were trying to enforce, is like, if you're going to do this stuff, you need to do it properly. You need to have a writer's room. You need to have a writer on retainer for the editing process to make sure that there's consistency, to help fix little plot holes because we didn't get coverage on that day, or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a healthy bunch of people who want to make this show, is the way it feels. They're not just they're not collecting a check. They are like here. They're present in the thing that's happening. And that's, I mean, yeah, that's where all good art is found, in my opinion. It's people passionate about doing it, passionate about the craft, and then also people passionate about knowing when not to overthink shit. And when just going, I think this is right, and just trusting, like you said, trusting the show.
Everything you're describing right here is exactly the sense that I get from watching the director's commentaries on the Better Call Saul episodes, because they bring in a bunch of the production and the writers to talk over it. And it's like, it's exactly what you're describing, just like equal parts passion, enthusiasm, readiness, preparation, and also equal parts inspiration and like an easiness, and a consideration for stuff that's not in your in your view, like a I don't know, a temperament to storytelling, almost like and that's like why that show works.
I like that, temperament to storytelling. That's actually a really good way of describing that. I think it's something that's so hard to communicate because it's not it's something that I've trying to explain across a length of time and some other content I'm working on that I'm helping produce. There's the difference between being I'm not trying to like mediate who is an artist and who isn't, but when you're in the craft and when you're in the space, and like this is all I think about for the most part. Like it's just all this rallying around. All the podcasts I listen to are about storytelling and all this stuff. It's all I'm thinking about. It's all the books I read. I'm always reading fiction, and if it's nonfiction, you better believe it's a textbook about writing, right? Or it's meditations on end stage capitalism, etc. I think there's when people say things like, this franchise, got bad after this, or, the fans are owed this, or this, that, or the third thing. The second they start talking in that space, I become immediately suspicious of an absence of that temperament. If you listen to, I might put a snippet in because I was watching a couple last night, a couple interviews with Tony Gilroy after Andor and sort of in the lead up to Andor season 2. Which is still quite a ways away because of the strike, which is good. A big part of what he talks about in that process is like they start to talking about Star Wars, and he's like, I don't care about Star Wars. I think Star Wars is pretty bad. What it gave us an opportunity to do was tell a story that all of us in the room were so eager to tell. It felt so like arresting and urgent for us to tell this story. And it's exactly what you just described is the way he talks about it, which is like, it's an urgency and an eagerness, but open, right? It's an open eagerness and an open urgency. It's not I have a vision and I'm right and we need to follow my vision. It's like, how can we all collectively make this better and bring out the best in each other from a disciplinary perspective?
We had a very short 5-day writer's room with my brother Dan Gilroy and Bo Willimon and Luke Hull, who's our production designer, was there, and Zana Wallenberg was there watching. And we just blitzed through. I had about 100 pages of stuff, and the beginning and the end. But we wanted a prison, and we didn't want to do a prison, as I said before, we didn't want to do a prison unless we could do something absolutely spectacular and fresh, because there's so many great prison movies, and if we can't do it, then if we can't find something new. And at some point, I really don't remember, and they don't remember either, someone said, well, what about electric floors? And we're like, oh, well, what about this? And this prison started to emerge, this behavioral. And we went back the next day, and then we have to start figuring out what it is they're making and how many guys on the floor and what should it be like. And it's like building a watch. What are you going to do? And I think everybody kind of jumped on the idea right away. It's like, well, what if they're building, what if he's building the thing that's going to kill him? And we were really surprised that I think some people must have picked up on it along the way, But we were really surprised at the number of people that were actually shocked by when we thought that would be, but it came up in the planning.
Yeah, I always get the sense that it's just a bunch of sensible people that sort of have an inkling for, you know, like, one, they all have good taste in art, but they all have this inkling for what makes good art, and they all sort of, I mean, you know, having, you know, a bit of background in film production, I've experienced this where, like, something comes along once in a while during production or pre-production that is kind of out of left field, but then everyone has this feeling that, like, it's appropriate but also, you know, stylish and inspired. And there are these moments where you identify, like, that this patch fits very well into this fabric that we're making right here, and yeah.
It's because it's I mean, I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about at the end of the season, and I guess how we end up feeling about where this ends up going, and how, I don't know, like, how you can feel the apparatus behind this change, perhaps, as the paratext around the show alters what's happening. But yeah, I completely agree. I think this is just it is different than the Defenders in that way, it's almost ineffable. I think we did a pretty good job of sketching its outline, but I mean, that probably doesn't do it justice. I'm sure at some point, I mean, that's the work of, like, all artists, is in some capacity trying to sketch around what those things are for them. And a big thing that I would say, especially if you're, you know, I think most people that listen to these types of shows that we do, and I know for this particular podcast feed in particular, it's people either interested in how stories work or interested in telling their own. And if you're that kind of person where you want to get into thinking and talking, or even doing this stuff, the biggest, most important thing is, like, learn to develop taste. And it doesn't have, like, you and I have similar tastes, and I think there is, like, good types of taste and bad types of taste. That's actually not true. Taste is, like, purely subjective. But the important thing is, like, you need to develop strong, articulated taste. Like, you need to watch something that everyone else thinks is good and be like, wow, they could have done these things way better. This is so mid. I can't believe they didn't go for this thing. Or, you know, I watched Succession and I was like, no, I'm good. I've seen all of these maneuvers. I'm fine, actually. And it's just because it's not for me. It's not doing the things that I'm interested in. And everyone's, it's the best show ever, this, that, and the third thing. And a big part of taste is you have to go out and consume a bunch of stuff that you don't think you'll like until you start to find whatever the niche is, right? I didn't even have a word for the stories that I tell until, like, 3 years ago. Like, I am obsessed with, like, Dying Earth science fantasy, which are two genre modes. I didn't have verbiage, like, there was no verbiage around them to create nouns because I wasn't aware of the kind of 80s slingshot into that, you know, because I'd only really read, like, Gene Wolfe's early stuff. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make there is, if you're looking for a cheat code, right, and there is no life hack, you're going to find all these tips and tricks on how to tell stories. That stuff only works because those are tools in the tool belt. You still have to find the direction, and the way that you start to find the direction is by developing a voice. The way you find a voice is initially by developing strong, articulated taste. And those things take time and effort and reflection. And it might help to trick all of your friends into doing podcasts about it for, like, a decade. That could help. If you talk about it every week for a decade, chances are it is gonna buttress that in your head. Speaking from personal experience.
That's the list of side effects on the side of the bottle. Podcasting for 10 years may include these.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, let's move along here. Karen goes and speaks to the socialite whose dad was assaulted that Daredevil stopped.
It's so weird. Like, yeah, what's the deal? What's the significance with her? Like, again?
They're like gossip magazine. They're like Kardashian type people.
Yeah, okay.
And I couldn't figure out. I was like, know this actress from somewhere. She looks so familiar. It turns out she's in a bunch of indie shit I saw like ages ago. It's one of those like, who the fuck is this? Yeah, really good little moment where, as we kind of said, Karen's going to report on this, and sort of explains her own trauma around her brother's death and that people blamed her, and because she had no means of telling people her perspective, what they heard became true. And so this is sort of what convinces Nada to tell her story, which will be important at the end of the next scene, which is Foggy going to the butcher, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you've already kind of put a pin in this, that this Karen stuff might be expanded on in this season. I remember most of it, but not all of it, so I'm interested to see what I think of that.
I'm so interested to hear what you think, because it's kind of messy.
I'm concerned I might really, really dislike it, is my concern.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, we get Foggy going to the butcher, the infamous butcher, and you know, he comes from this giant family. It's a bit of fun. It's nice to see him in his element, you know, and the contrast between him and his nice suit. And someone, I'm not going to say who because they're not a public facing figure, but someone was like, "Oh, isn't season 3 kicking off soon?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, it's the season where you and Foggy have the same hair," which I resent because
Called out.
Yeah, when I cut my hair a little bit shorter, which I'll do in a couple of weeks, it is eerily similar. So I just, you know, it's worth noting.
That's hilarious.
I had that haircut before I watched that season of television. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say that it reminds me of your old haircut, like 2017 haircut.
Yeah, the big slicked back. Yeah. I might. Hey, who knows? I might. There might be another era of that. I don't know. I can tame multitudes.
It's coming back.
Yeah. The other problem with that is the hair product was quite not oily, but like it smelled plasticky. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, the smell can be a deal breaker.
Yeah. Whereas the new stuff I've got, this is not what I'm wearing today, but the red one stuff that I've been using it's primo. And it smells a little bit. It just has like a little bit of a musk to it. It smells like a cologne or something. Nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Mine is sheer butter. It smells nice.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's the way to do it. There you go. There you go. Bit of hair chat with the boys. Geez, we're really not moving through this material, are we? Okay, so we then get Fisk getting, you know, the argument in the FBI. Basically, Nadeem. The hook that's important in the butcher is Foggy's dad has arthritis. He can't really work anymore, so his brother is kind of poised to take over. And everyone is sort of saying, "Hey, Foggy, maybe you could come back. You could, come home," kind of thing. Is what they keep
because of money problems is the important thing as well.
Yes, and Foggy's got that uptown job, so you know he sort of, and there is a bit of a tension there of like maybe he could offer to help, and it seems like he might have done previously, and they said no, potentially.
Right.
That's what I got from the conversation with him and his brother, at least.
Okay. What I got was that he just sort of, him and his brother just sort of fell into their roles without ever like saying it out loud. Because as his brother said, he was always the academically smart one. So yeah, and maybe there's like a bit of resentment towards him and his brother.
Yeah, I actually like that more, I think. Yeah. So Fisk, yeah, they have this big argument, and Ray basically, it's quite a good scene. The FBI guys are there, and everyone is against it. Tower's like, this is a bad idea, and Ray does this really slick rhetorical move where he's like, I'm not happy about it either, and frankly, it makes me need to have a shower every time I talk to the dude. But think of what we could achieve. This was one piece of information. Think of what we could achieve with this. And they all and by positioning himself with the same perspective as them, he's able to bring the head of police and the DA Blake Tower, sort of into that mode of thinking, and then convince them, we should move him under house arrest. The obvious problem being Fisk is such a big, important criminal that is diming out all these other criminals that they're basically going to have to lock him up in a fortress to protect him, which is the underlying implication here. And that's what I think. It's the head of police says something like, we need a small army to protect him or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps just one man.
And also what happened? What was the last thing we saw of Blake Tower last season? It was after he decided to leave town, and then Daredevil was like interrogating him.
It was after Reyes' death when she gets gunned down in her office. We get a bit of him and Matt colluding, and then Matt convinces him to send the children that they recover to Claire, and then we get one interstitial scene with Tower and Foggy a bit later, where there's like a bit of resolution there, but it wasn't really noteworthy.
So is he the DA now?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they said in the scene? So somewhere between season 2 and this scene, he took over Reyes's job.
Yeah, well, because he got promoted to a detective in season 1, and then he was like, I think because Reyes was the DA, right? So was he the assistant DA in season 2?
Yeah, he was Reyes' assistant in season 2. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe he's got her job now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Anyway, he returns here, and I kept saying in the previous seasons that to keep an eye on this dude, because he's just like this squirrely little dude who keeps popping up. I say squirrely because he's very kind of like self-motivated.
Yeah,
and you can tell in this scene that he's like that he's weighing up in his mind is how it's gonna affect him either positively or negatively. So yes, it is. Ray does everything in this scene. He appeals to Tower. He appeals to the police chief.
His boss even.
Yeah, his boss. Yeah, he does it well.
He's good at this job, but it's also I think it's one of those like your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness type things. This ability to kind of manipulate himself into all these different shapes might have been how he got himself into this position in the first place.
Yeah, true.
It's like, how flexible can you be until something breaks? I think that's the question for Ray's character. And then we get Matt going out for a rematch. So he does a little bit of detective work here to figure out where the laundromat was from the previous night. Once again, using the blind thing. So he goes to the laundromat. It seems like they're running guns or something. I couldn't quite piece together what they're doing, but he opens up a case of guns and then he goes and fights him. So I think there's something, they're doing something shady.
Yeah, just general mafia type stuff, I suppose. Also, why does it seem like, how he goes to the first van and he's like, oh, I'm actually looking for somewhere else? Why does it seem like that guy is also a criminal? Like, did you get that impression that like...
I thought that was the maneuver, yeah.
Yeah, like, is every laundromat business like a front?
I mean, it's a perfect front.
Yeah.
Maybe he's on Walt's payroll. Maybe he's cooking the meth,
Ah, I see. Yeah.
There you go.
Access to all the chemicals you need.
That's right. Yeah, he was shady as hell. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
but I also like when he goes to the actual laundromat and how like polite that guy is who gives him the flyer and he's like really nice to him.
Yeah, it's quite a nice moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course we get Matt. It's a really great sequence. I've noted here this feels very season 1. This little sequence, it's just like a messy, awkward brawl. Matt opens it by tasing a dude, which feels like cheating.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. I just love that he's not himself, so he's trying to figure out ways around that. And yeah, he does a big punch up.
Yeah. What does he take something from there? Like he opens like a little box or something.
He sees guns in there. That's what I mean by it.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And so when he calls the police, he's like, "There are guns here," like, and then he leaves the phone, so they'll come. After zip tying the dudes up. So, he's got a bit of the mojo back, I guess, is what we're to take here. Still not himself, right? Like he still this would have been easy for a season 2 Daredevil. It would have mopped these guys up. This Matt, not so much.
Yeah, it's what you were saying. He's just he's just straight up boxing him, like taking hits when he can't dodge because he physically can't. But that's no worries for him. He just counterpunch.
Well, yeah, and you get the battling Jack moment where he gets knocked on his ass, and they're like pretty sure he's done, and then he gets up, which is exactly what Sister Maggie said, right? She's like, you can get knocked down as much as you want. It's about how you get up, and it's sort of him seemingly remembering where he comes from, right? This is, in some ways, this in the ways like literally costume wise, he's going back to his roots. I think he's also Matt. This is also Matt going back to the elemental components of who he is and where he comes from and his inheritance. It's a great sequence. Plus, I like the way that this is like, he doesn't just beat them up. He beats them up, ties them up, and then he goes to Nada and he's like, hey, if you go to the police precinct right now, you can ID the people that kidnapped you, and you can really make the charges stick. They're already going to have them on possession of guns, but you can really make that stick, and get some kind of closure for your dad here, which is not something I don't think a season 1 Daredevil would have done that. Not sure what you think of that.
Yeah, I agree. There is something different about his process in this sequence.
Is it that maybe he would have used Nelson and Murdoch to do it in season 1?
Oh, maybe.
Do you know what I mean? Because it struck me as odd for that. Maybe for that reason.
I
don't know. Something to think about. I love if anyone has a thought there. I'd love to know what makes. Yeah, it felt materially different and unusual. Yeah, write in. Let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. Ray asks Fisk a simple question. Okay, yeah, so they're in the car. And this is my favorite thing. Ray is like, you just need to do everything I tell you. Can you do that? And instead of saying yes,
he says, say no more. Hold on.
Fisk says, here you go. If you build a prison of stone and steel and present the prisoner with a challenge, any truly determined man will find a way out. But love is the perfect prison, inescapable. You see, Agent Nadeem, I am always in prison wherever I go. And if these things help me protect Vanessa, then they are nothing to me, and I will do whatever I must. And what I like is that he doesn't actually say yes.
Yeah, I did notice that.
It's a clever little manipulation of Nadeem to be like, I'm going to do what I have to do, and you're going to do what you have to do. But we don't have to, I'm not meeting you on this level here,
Yeah, and he has to trick himself into playing that character that Nadeem sees him as. But
interesting.
The fact that he also doesn't straight up say yes is like, I don't know. He's got some sort of weird honor that's driving him as well here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of noteworthy. There's a respect, perhaps, that he has for Nadeem in some sense.
Yeah.
Huh. And then, things break bad as the convoy is hit by the Albanians. And the best detail for me from a storytelling and filmmaking perspective is so the Albanians arrive and they kill all of the FBI agents, and we see the entire sequence, except for like 2 shots toward the end, from the interior of the car where Fisk is. And it's this claustrophobic, like tense, like scary way of shooting this sequence.
And just couple that with how vulnerable Fisk is, that we've never seen him like this before, where he's just completely like defenseless and he can do nothing about it. It's obviously it's a good setup for his relationship with Poindexter.
Yeah, with Dex, yeah.
We
should, so Dex shows up, who we've seen in he was in the previous scene in the FBI, and then obviously as they get into the convoy, and he does some crazy shit immediately. He guns down like 14 dudes. He's like ricocheting bullets off of surfaces to hit people behind corners.
It's so good. It's such good filmmaking. Like, and it's also characteristic of the rest of the action in this season, which, like, you know, it's characterized by like this scrappy, tactile nature of you can see the bullets ricocheting off stuff. You can see the where it lands in people, in their head or wherever. But it's also like super sleek and very clear what's happening, where it's happening, who it's hitting, and stuff like that. It's such a unique feeling that this season had.
Yeah, I think if in some sense season 1's action was characterized by the kind of everyone just taking as many hits as they can, right? Like this kind of brutal sort of brutal scrappiness, right? And then season 2 is about sort of high octane action. It's like superhero action, kung fu action, that sort of thing.
Like
I think you're right.
Willpower kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then season 3 is really like, it's two things. It's physical objects in space and how they're used, and then it's strength, right? Like it's about who can hit the hardest, the fastest, right? Is really what this season ends up becoming about from an action perspective, which we're already kind of seeing, right?
Actually, that objects in space thing is a good way to put it. I think that's maybe why I like it so much. It's very kind of Jackie Chan-esque, almost. Yeah. It's one of my favorite details is toward the end, he throws a knife at two dudes, but he does it with one flourish. He's like, and then it just goes, and it hits the two guys, and then he picks up the knife and, you know, wipes it off. It's great. He's a really cool character to watch on screen. It's so different. Like, this is like, he's on some John Wick shit, right? Like, that's what's happening here. Yeah, well, I mean, just the general concept of like someone with such godlike aim that you can ricochet off bullets off surfaces and still hit something. It's pretty terrifying if you're up against that, you know. And that's why I love when the two Albanians surrender and he just like murks them both on the spot. Oh yeah, that's the other thing is no prisoners, right? Yeah, which is going to come back up later in the season. Oh yeah. So yeah, there's actually a lot going on in this scene. Yeah. Plus, like you kind of alluded to, right? He's so like he's just calm, like he's in control in this moment, in a way that Fisk isn't. Yeah, and that's going to be an interesting counterweight, I think, throughout this season. Is, you know, for Dex, the question is like, when is he in control and when is he not? What is he in control of and what isn't he in control of? And same for Fisk. Yeah, it's pretty spectacular, and the big detail that we kind of walk out on is Matt is somewhere, I think, at the hospital, given that he just went to see Nada. We don't actually know, but I'm pretty sure it's right. And he overhears the on the police radio that Fisk has escaped prison, or Fisk is out of prison and he's been attacked, or this, you know, he basically learns that Fisk is out, and then we cut to credits. Which is great. I love that that like there's a dissonant kind of tension between Matt exploring his new worldview about breaking free from a divine path or a divine plan versus his life mission that just got dropped into his lap, you know, randomly. It's like two things that would probably cause a lot of internal debate in Matt's mind. That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and let me tell you guys, it's probably not going to go super well for one Matthew Murdock. Probably not. It's going to be entertaining though.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more to say about it. Next episode, Pat, we are talking about... Actually, is there anything else, or is that... Because that's the last note I had.
No, that's all I had.
Love it. I just want to point out, runtime-wise, most of our Season 2 episodes clocked in about 2.5 hours. Season 1, about 2 hours. This season, 2 hours. The Defenders, I think the average was like an hour and 15. So... Just from pure material perspective, I'm interested to see how we go this season, and hopefully we have a lot to talk about. So we're covering episodes 29 and 30 next time, which is episode 3 and episode 4 of season 3. Episode 3 is No Good Deed. Episode 4 is Blindsided. This is going to be a slightly longer season than the others because of the way that these episodes are structured. We're just doing duos this time. There's no triple coverage. Just the nature of how they made the show. So look forward to that. Patrick, where can people find you on the internet if they want to hear more of your thoughts on films and philosophy?
People can find me on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Our podcast is called A Method to the Madness. We have a website, AMTTM.com. You can find our socials from there.
Love it. And of course, you guys know the drill by now. We are produced by ZeroIndent. Everything we do is made possible by our Patreons and, of course, by you supporting us over at underink.press, by buying our books, buying our merch, and helping to keep the lights on. These shows take an incredible amount of time, I think, per episode. So per hour of content, I did the math the other day. Per hour of Daredevil episode is about 10 hours of my life-ish. Research, editing, post-production, pre-production. So, there's a lot of effort that we put into these. And in particular, you'll notice from season 2 onward, the quality and the style of the edit is something that I've become really invested in. So you'll notice a sharp increase in quality there, which I think hopefully will add to the experience. So if you can give us, any money to help support us, it helps us do things like pay Crystal to make incredible artwork. And then eventually, when we get to a position where it makes sense, start to make sure that people like Pat who are involved get paid for their time as well. Would love to get to that position. That's kind of the end goal. We'll obviously be here doing it regardless, but we do appreciate any support for independent media crit coverage like this. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I love doing it about this show. So the other thing is you can look forward to Pat's Perspective Season 4, and the best way to help us get there is to either support us if you can financially. If you can't, that's fine. Consider giving us a rating or review, or engaging wherever you find us, or sending it to one person you think might like it. That'll do it for this episode. We will catch you next time to really get our teeth sunk into Season 3, and perhaps open up some plot lines that may go unexpected places, I'll say, because I know that episode 4 in particular has a hook that I'm very excited to talk about. So we'll catch you then. Otherwise, would love to know what you thought of Season 3 opening premiere. We'll catch you next time.
Ooh, bye.